Okay, machine is ready to go. I'm going to sew this seam, side seam, 1/2 inch. One side, the other. Always remember to put the right sides together. Worst thing you want to do is sew it on the wrong side. Okay, I've sewed my side seams. The next step is I've already started that. My basting stitch on the cap of the sleeve that has 2 sets of notches. Notches here are, of course, the shoulder notch. You know what? You don't need that. And there's a notch here. Let's see if you can see this. There's a notch here, and there's a notch here. You want to do it on the closer of the 2 notches to the shoulder. And it says to put 3 rows of stitching. So I have 1 more row to go. And I just unthreaded the needle. Don't forget, put it on base. Now, according to our order of operations, we want to do 3 rows, basting from notch to notch, 1/4 inch, 3/8, and 3/4. That's going to give you a beautiful, even spaced gathers on the top of this. Now, because I can't tell which is this is the right sleeve. So that's the back. So I have to sew this underarm seam of the sleeve also. 1/2 inch. On our basings. Now, turn that right side out. I'm going to press the seams open. going to sew the other sleeve also under the arm. This has no gathers. Just make sure you have all your notches. This is the right sleeve. This is the left.
I'm still waiting for the start to be ready, so I'm gonna cut out my other fabric.
All right. Right. There is a little bit of a gap in the way that we do this because in my case, I don't have a right and a wrong side to either of these two fabrics. When you have a right side, and that was the purpose to suggest using two prints, because then you could, at a glance, you could see which is the right and the wrong side, and you don't have, I had to figure out which was the right sleeve and which was the left sleeve. You won't have to do that. You have two different fabrics that have a right and a wrong side. Okay, that being said, I'm going to do some pressing and I'll be back. Okay, now that I've done all of my underarm seams in both the sleeve and the bodice, we're going to set the sleeves in. I'm going to start on the plain sleeve, which has no gathers. Here's my underarm sleeve, my underarm seam rather, and the underarm seam of the sleeve. We're going to match it at the underarm and pin it. This is the perfect time to pin. Now, I hold this up and I have my shoulder seam. How to do this again. The shoulder seam here and the shoulder notch on the sleeve. I'm going to match them up and pin that. Don't forget right sides together. That's the seam. That's the notch. Pin it. And then work around the whole sleeve again. But pinning them together. Matching, of course, all of your notches. This is the double notch for the back, double notch, matching your notches. Now there is a bit of ease in this sleeve that gathers. And I opted to just sew it in as opposed to putting a gathering stitch because I'm going to ease it with my fingers. I'll show you how to do that. If you prefer, it's okay to use a gathering stitch. Just make sure that you don't get any gathers in that seam. Now going to the other side, and I'm going to see my notches are matching again. That's the single notch for the front of the sleeve, the front of the garment. I think what I'm going to do is just to show you another option. I'm going to run a basting stitch on this to accommodate that ease that I mentioned. you're gonna have to work on. So the machine set up at the basting stitch and go from notch to notch. Do it at about 3/8 of an inch. Well, it started, but it didn't do the whole seam. Having some mechanical difficulties in this department today. Our overlock machines are not working. Some of the other machines aren't working well.
You don't say the back seam.
No, you'll never sew the back seam because the back seam gets faced.
Okay.
That's where you're gonna, if you want to get a visual of everything that this bodice is going to include, and look at my bodice on the dress form. You'll see that there's buttons. Well, I didn't put buttons, but there's buttons and buttonholes in the back. That's where your facing is going to go. Now, because I did get a small amount of basting stitches, I can't use this little bit and pulling it out. Starting over. So, okay. See? Working. Now, this is the sleeve that has no gathers. This is set in sleeve. And it's more a matter of ease, not gathers. If you feel more comfortable with the gathering stitch, then by all means do that. I'm going to repin, matching my notch to the shoulder seam. Set it on regular stitch, and I'm going to start under the arm. Now, I know this is going to be a little hard to see because it's a circle, but I'm going to start here with my underarm seams on both the sleeve and the garment. Making sure they match. Now, I like to take my pins out before I actually sew, because I really don't want to break a needle. Nelly back tack. This seam is 1/2 inch. Again, it's really going to be hard to see because it's in the circle. Let me put the camera. No, that's not a good view. Right, that looks okay. And because it is a circle,
Can you close the camera?
What's, pardon? Hello?
Hi, can you close the camera because we can't see?
Well, I guess I gotta do it the way it was. I'm trying to give you as close up as a view as possible because it's circular. This camera. Is that better?
Yeah, thanks.
Gathering stitch. Okay. Always, whenever you're sewing anything that isn't a straight seam, always keep tabs on what's going on the underneath, because what you don't want to happen is that there's a pleat in there and you catch it as you sew the seam, because that happens a lot. Now I'm going to sew this. All right, let's pull it slightly. My gathered stitches. Slightly is the key word, because it's not a question of gathers as much as it is a question of ease. You go so far, and then you have to turn the sleeve garment. Whenever you turn, you want to place your needle into the garment. I'm going to pull the other half, get a little bit of an ease on this side. Now, right now it's looking gathered. I don't want that, so I'm going to spread it out so that it looks like it's flat. It's just a matter of ease. Can you guys see this? I know it's hard to see.
We can see it.
Exactly. The beauty of working with cotton is that the ease can be pressed out. Muslin doesn't work so well, even though it is 100% cotton. It doesn't really do a good job in the ease because it's very stiff. Okay, I'm done with the ease. Now I'm just going to finish the sleeve back to the arm, the underarm seam here, and this sleeve is set. There's also an option to, which is what I'm doing at the moment, is to make sure that I pull them so that they're equal. Now, one thing, and I don't know if I mentioned it to this class, but there is one thing to consider anytime you are sewing a seam, and it worked against us in this case. So whatever side you're sewing, like in this case, this was the larger side. It would be actually, if you have two seams and one is slightly smaller than the other, that's the side that you want to put under this foot, because in the process of sewing it, this foot kind of drags the fabric and it almost stretches it a little. So, you know, that one test that you had to do for your certification that was circular, and the one that was to a point, that's the side you want to put under the needle, under the foot, because it drags it and you're going to wind up with equal parts when the seam is finished. Anyway, so this sleeve is almost complete. The only thing I have left to do now is to overlock this whole seam, which, as we know, the overlock machines are experiencing technical difficulties, so I may not do that today. Let's look at the sleeve. It looks clean. I know it's hard to see because it's ivory and it's not really any contrast of color, but examine it closely. And when it's good, you want to press this and you'll have a nice finish. The last thing you can do to this, other than you can't do the overlock, well, you can, but we can't, is to turn this up. Now, inside of my sleeve, there is a notch on the side seam. That is how much hem this sleeve allows for. So I'm going to turn it up at the notch. It's a 1/2 inch. Again, if you're feeling comfortable pinning it, then do so. That hem is only a 1/2 inch. Again, we're working with a circle. You could even press this, and that would help. At a glance, you don't have to think about how much you're turning it. You already did that by pressing it up. And mine's lining up with the 1/2 inch mark here on the machine. That's always a good indicator. But please, when you sew hems like this, make sure that the actual stitch is on the end, this overlocked edge. Don't do it like a 1/4 inch. You want it on the overlock. That's the correct way to finish the hem.
So, yeah, we can tell in our. Yeah.
Like I said, this sleeve, the sleeve is finished except for the overlock. The hem is very accurate, all 1/2 inch. And I'm using the contrasting thread so you can see exactly what I'm doing. Okay? Okay. One more sleeve and we're complete for today. Again, I'm going to start by pinning the underarm seams together. Those seams have been pressed open, so pin them that way, and it'll be less bulky when you wear the garment, that is. The other one I'd like to go for is the shoulder notch. There's a notch here and the shoulder seam here. I'm going to put those together and pin them. See, I do it on the wrong side because I can press, or I can pin the seam open. Back to the sleeve. Yeah, we had 2 sets of notches. This earlier notch is to get the sleeve to fit. So I'm going to pin at that notch. And the second notch is where you start your gathers. This doesn't have gathers yet. And clearly, because I'm using red thread, you can see where I started my gather stitch. Okay. Going to the other side, the back. Okay, there's the notch, double notch for the back, and the double notch for the back. Now, continue until we get to those gathering stitches. That's another notch. You can see that notch. That's where our gathering stitches begin. Now you can see this is the armhole of the garment. This is the cap of the sleeve. Clearly, there's a lot of fullness. So this is what we're going to gather. And we made 3 gathering stitches so that we can make a beautiful, evenly distributed cap of gathers. Pull them simultaneously. Ideally, if you had to choose, it's best to have most of the gathers right at the shoulder line. Let's see, I'm pulling and they're not pulling equally, so I'm going to pull the 2 that are looser just to get an even distribution. Okay, now it's better. I still need a little bit more of a gather, and I'm going to separate them. Now they meet. See, the gathered side meets the sleeve side. We'll do the other side. The only thing you do not want to ever do is once you start to pull the gathered stitches, whichever side stitch you pull, stay consistent, because if you then turn around and you pull, I'm going to pull the top stitches. If you pull the bottom stitches, it's a lock stitch machine and it's going to lock the stitches, and you're going to have to rip your stitches out and start all over.
Hey, I'm sorry. I have this small. Oh, come on. I know.
Okay, now we got this same size. But what I want to do, like I said, ideally it's good to have a really nice group of gathers right here at that notch of the shoulder. And I don't have them, so I'm going to manipulate the darts, the gathers rather, to that area. Now the other top, the stitch on the edge didn't pull as tight as the rest of the stitches. So let me pull that a little bit tighter. Now see how nicely distributed those gathers are? That's ideally what you want. Again, we're going to sew the seam, but we're not going to overlock it. And that's the only thing that you can do on your own. If we can get these machines to work, I could do mine, but so far, no. Whenever it appears to be too loose, pull your gathering stitches. So there's my gathering stitches. There's my armhole. These are my gathering stitches. When I'm finished the seam, I'm gonna cut those off, but not until I finish the seam. Half-inch seam allowance, starting under the arm. And you'll do the same thing that we've done to every other seam, a round seam. Sew it a little at a time. I'm gonna take my pins out. Like I said, I don't like to break needles. Can you see this enough? Needle down. Spin out. And then move. Now we have 3 basic rows of stitching, 1/4 inch, 3/8, and 3/4. Technically, this 3/4 inch, let me see if I can get it to show. There's three layers, 3 different stitches. You're going to want to pull this one out because it's going to show on the outside of the garment. You just don't want that to show. Always, like I said, always keeping tabs on what's going on underneath of the foot, because sometimes you get pleats. You just don't want to. We have a seam here, so we want to make sure that that's good and flattened out, so we don't get any pleats. Basically, we're finishing this armhole back to the under arm seam. Back tap, always. Now, this is what my seam looks like on the outside and then on the inside. It gathers are nicely distributed. That's ultimately your goal. Now, when we look at the outside of the garment, we can see there is the widest of your gathering stitches. So I'm going to pull that out. And cut the others so I have a nice clean edge. You don't want that stitch to show on the outside of the garment. That's your gathered cap. You can see that. Probably if I put it further away. So now the bottom also needs to be finished, but we're gonna wait and we're gonna just go this far because this was a regular hem. This is elastic, and I don't have elastic today. So we're gonna do that elastic on Monday. And this is as far as I would like you to get. The bodice is almost complete. The only thing that I can't do for you today is to overlock these armhole seams and do the elastic on the bottom because I need elastic. Does anybody have any questions?